place. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So between February 16th and March 16th, a new anti-anxiety prescriptions increased almost 34%. Organizational leaders need to exercise the foresight in responding to this extraordinary circumstance, or their employee culture will be irreversibly damaged. The experience of being in crisis triggers a variety of reactions in the average employee. And although we cannot predict the reactions of specific individuals, groups of employees will tend to toward the most common reactions. If we think ahead, we can anticipate some of the negative group behaviors we expect to see, and introducing new practices and leadership patterns can help create an environment where employees have a positive influence that counteracts the crisis. Jonathan is an organizational culture and agile change expert. For the past 3 years, he's been studying and building methodologies to better understand how to assess and influence organizational culture as he builds his company, Corporate Culture Specialists. He has a special focus on creating alignment between purpose and employee work life in ways that enrich individuals and the communities. This presentation provides an introduction to using lead and lag indicators as a vehicle for creating positive organizational culture that counterbalances the crisis mindset. So we are in for a treat and lots more thinking this morning. So Jonathan, welcome. Thank you so much. And I am going to go ahead. You have co-hosting abilities, so take it away.
All right. Let me get this presentation shared. Good morning, everyone. Let's see here. Gosh, first I have to find the share. This is Zoom. This is standard. I should not have a problem with this.
So I know for mine, if you hover down at the bottom, there's one that pops up.
Oh, there it is.
Having a bad experience.
There we are. Okay. Let's share my PowerPoint here. Okay. I'd like to know if you can see it.
Yep.
And how is the sizing on the screen?
It's in the non-started PowerPoint. Do you mean to do that? You can start it and do full screen if you want to. The other one, switch it.
I'm sorry, I don't follow.
You're in the presentation, like the speaker view of it, so we can see like the black box with the notes and the next part.
Oh, you can. Okay. Let's see. I believe that's because I have dual monitors.
Yeah, swap displays.
There we are. Marvelous.
Perfect.
Okay. How's the text size? Everyone can read it?
Yep.
Yes, perfect.
So the introduction, says it all with a mouthful. So let's kind of take one piece at a time of some of these concepts. I want to start by revisiting the challenge question. What comes first, the bad experience or the bad behavior? And if we take a step back and think about the situation that we're in right now, what we're going to find is that these behaviors and experiences are both at the same time feeding into the workforce. I'm not sure how many folks here have employees, or maybe your consulting directly relates to dealing with employees or developing leadership. But we're going to focus primarily on the employee base of an organization, right? That's the context for the information we're talking about. Right now, during the coronavirus pandemic, stress levels are extraordinary. They are not normal. In regular work life, stress is high, but right now it is just ballooning. And what that means is that employees are going to have this amplified set of experiences where their stress level and anxiety increase. We have social distancing going on. There's physical danger that people are experiencing, right? Real fear for family members. There's a lot of anger toward others. There's a lot of division. And on an organizational level, there's understaffing going on. People tend to be overworked. You have workforce reduction.
Make sure he's good for school.
Sorry, was that for me?
No, I'm sorry. I thought I was on mute. I had to tell my husband to do something. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. That's fine. With workforce reductions, you actually have employees carrying the workload of more than one employee, right? That's a norm right now. On top of that, childcare is hard to get a hold of. Summer camps have largely been canceled, closed. So parents especially are on triple duty, right? Looking after their kids and taking care of workload that's greater than normal. There's a tremendous amount of stress. On top of that are human behaviors coming into play, largely from their organizations taking actions, their organizational leadership, team leads taking actions to do layoffs, or coworkers expressing hostility, obstructionism, any number of workplace aggression kind of behaviors, distrust, decreased loyalty, poor communication. And what does all that stress do to a person? All that stress actually serves to generate additional behaviors. So we talked about behaviors and the environment influencing an individual. That individual is now going to express the organic response to all of those things. Now, this is not going to fall on either side of whether or not a person can or should respond in a positive way to what they're going through. But what we are going to assume is that people are naturally irrational and prone to emotional decision making. It's the natural state that we all live in. And it makes it easier for us in a high stress situation to ourselves behave by not showing up at work or being hostile towards coworkers. We're going to be less honest with our team leads. We're not going to tell them what we're really going through because we're going to be more guarded. Worst case scenario, there's potential for violence. And all these expressions of negative behavior, theoretically being a result of our environmental experiences and behaviors that we've been exposed to, are going to come full circle. Is anyone familiar with the Arbinger Institute? No. So I'm gonna bring a model from this organization. The Arbinger Institute focuses on resolving interpersonal conflict between individuals, conflict that is cyclical and long-lasting and deep-rooted. And I'm going to apply it on an organizational level. And the way this model works in a cycle, if you look on the bottom right, the number one item, the number one could, theoretically be anywhere in the cycle, but we'll start with employee negative behavior. So let's say an employee is underperforming because they're stressed, or being dishonest, or they lash out. So you don't have the patience that you normally do. The organizational representative, like a team lead or supervisor, sees that behavior, and the natural human response, if you're in a high stress state, is to objectify the employee. So rather than seeing the employee as, John, who has 2 kids and no child care and is having a really difficult time right now, he made a mistake. The short-circuited response is, John is no good, he's lazy, he's dishonest, and he doesn't appreciate what I'm doing to help his work life be better. And there's an immediate justification and objectification of that employee. And what that leads the organizational representative to do is 2 things. First, they'll go and find people to agree with them. They'll actually recruit people into that objectification, and then they'll perpetuate it by behaving negatively in response. So rather than, let's say, trying to connect with John and see, what is he going through? How can I help? The response is instead, well, John can't be trusted. Let's check up on him more frequently and kind of get him under control and maybe manage him a little more closely. That negative response is witnessed by the employee. So John sees that and John thinks to himself, wow, my team lead doesn't care about me, doesn't appreciate me, doesn't understand me. They're good for nothing boss. And there's an immediate objectification of the organization. And that can be on any scale. So the team lead is objectified, or the CEO is objectified, or the entire organization as a whole is objectified. Right? I think this is probably how a lot of employees feel when they quit an organization because they had a bad boss. And that's not to discount, right, those negative experiences they've had, or that leaving might be the right thing to do, but it's a natural human state of mind in high emotion state or high stress state. And the response, the next step, right, is back to square one. After you've recruited some other employees to see the way you do, then you're going to go ahead and not show up for work some more and turn in some, less productive work some more, and perpetuate the cycle. The cycle is organic, and it will just keep going round and round. And these can be very short term, or they can be very long term. You can have these cycles exist within an organization, causing all kinds of problems and a lack of productivity for a long time. And it can go completely unnoticed if you've gotten used to it and you've accepted the objectification as real and normal. And our human irrational thinking, it tends towards that. It tends towards accepting the past as real and moving on forward, comparing everything against that original negative experience. So we just carry these things on forward forever. So how do we break an organizational collusion cycle, right? Or how do you break any kind of conflict cycle? You have to introduce something that's less organic. You have to do something that is intentional and planned and systematic in order to interrupt the negative or destructive organic tendencies and reassert positive organic tendencies, so that you can continue building good relationships instead of destructive ones. So, if we're going to talk about this in sort of just a personal interruption sort of way, if you're a team lead, or let's say you're a consultant, you're working with an organization, you think there's been a lot of mistreatment, one thing you can do or encourage your clients to do is to just stop just stop for a minute, because you have to be able to intentionally listen and reflect on what you've experienced, reflect on what you see and hear, maybe spend some time with offended parties or people around them to get additional perspective. And then you'll be able to find insights that give you a direction forward and tell you, okay, there's the real problem, or one of them, or I think I'm close to the real problem, and I can act on that in a positive way that interrupts the conflict cycle. And in that process, you will be humanizing the other parties in the conflict. So that's where we come in with the concept of lead and lag measures. This lead and lag indicators is a very kind of standard thing, but I know not everyone's familiar with it. Not everyone needs to be familiar with it. So I'll give you a sort of an introduction into the lead and lag indicator. I like to refer to the lead indicator or lead measure as a lead behavior, because that's functionally what it is. A lead behavior is something that, let me back up a little bit. The lead and lag measures are typically organizational factors that you measure to influence and get a read on success or failure in an organization. So a lag measure, for example, would be your incident reports or your turnover in an organization. It's something that lets you look into the past and know if you've been successful against that information. Like, was our turnover good or bad? How did we do in keeping people around? The lead measure or lead behavior is on the front end of all that work. Everything that led up to the layoff numbers or the turnover numbers, the lead behavior happens before all of that work. And it is a measure, but it's different in that you are not going to look at the past. You're actually going to decide what you want the future to look like, and then institute behaviors that cause that future. I always have trouble describing the lead behaviors. How am I doing? Do you guys have clarifying questions so far? Me, because I will clarify it. Okay. So the lead behaviors, these are things that you choose to do in order to cause an end result. They are less, or they're more difficult to find or invent than lag behaviors or lag measures, excuse me. But they are more useful in deciding and influencing the future. Your lag measures are retrospective. You're always looking at history. You cannot change what you're reading. You cannot influence it anymore because it is the past, but it's useful for hindsight. And if you have both the lead and the lag happening at the same time, then you're able to decide how the future should go, act on that, and then measure and assess the past to determine how well you did, or whether or not your lead behaviors were a success. I'm going to get into some examples that I think will help clarify all this, but do you have any questions before I get into those? No?
I'm good.
You're good? Okay. How are we doing on time, Christina?
We got until technically 10:15.
10:15 until 10:15? Okay, doing fine. So I'm going to get into some parables. And I'll walk through a couple of the ways that I think situations could be dealt with using the lead and the lag approach. And then we'll do one together, and I'm hoping you guys will give me some ideas for how to resolve the problem. The first one is Andrew. Andrew is going to quit his job. So Andrew has, because of workforce reduction, been forced to carry the workload of 3 people. He is overworked. On the outset, there was an agreement that this additional workload would be temporary, but we're already well beyond that temporary timeline. It doesn't look to Andrew like things are going to change. He has just lost the last bit of energy that he had to carry on this work. I mean, he's already looking for a new job. So he's going to leave. Andrew is going to leave, definitely going to happen. Given that situation, what could we have done in the past, in hindsight, to affect where he is now? What could we have predicted to help us anticipate Andrew's predicament, to mitigate how difficult this is?
You mean as far as like his bosses?
Yeah, folks who have decision-making power in the organization, what can they do in advance of this situation? I'm going to go through what I think would be good lead behaviors and lag measures for this. You give me feedback on it, and then we'll go into another parable.
Okay.
So,
Are you asking what we think they should do, or you're?
I'm gonna tell you what I think they should do.
Okay.
It was rhetorical this time.
Okay. I was like, I know what I would do, but.
We'll get into some dialogue in the second parable here, or you can give me some feedback on this one in a moment. I would love that. So I think that if organizational leadership had taken a beat to think about the impact of their decisions on the average person, they would have had an insight that workforce reductions are going to cause workload changes, right? And the experience of having your workload shift or grow unexpectedly is going to cause people to feel a sense of unfairness, and it's going to add stress, and it's going to leave them exhausted. So knowing that's coming, and knowing operationally we don't have much of a choice for those except to have those things happen, what behaviors or leadership patterns can we start now that make it easier for employees to go through that experience? I think it would have been wise at least to consider a couple of these lead behaviors. The first, recurring workload and stress surveys, focus groups, and interviews should be conducted. So you should be opening up communication channels in a more recurring fashion so that you can begin to get an active measure month to month what the stress level is like. Hopefully employees are going to be honest on these surveys. It's never a guarantee, but if you don't ask the question, you're not going to get any information about it. So you need to be asking, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, how close are you to being burned out, or let's say how many points or How much more difficult is your workload now than normal? And that information is going to both open up communication and give you some ongoing insights as you have to, institute these workload changes. Second, I would recommend is that when you have an especially difficult situation, like Andrew, what Andrew's going through, right? Andrew is carrying the work of 3, and he's definitely off schedule as far as when he was supposed to move off of that workload change. So you have to treat that as a serious situation. You mitigate that quickly. And you have to have a plan and anticipate acting on that. So the lead behavior looks something like watching the reports that are coming in, watching feedback that's coming in on the focus groups or interviews, and then following up quickly when you think that there is someone with a heightened level of stress. I think a good third behavior would be to just create better access to counseling services. And leading by example, you get leadership to iterate to employees that it's okay to need help and it's okay to get help. That type of communication and easing the difficulty of getting to those services is a good behavior that should lead towards an overall improvement in mental health as you're working through all these circumstances. So for Andrew specifically, let's say you pick up on the situation that he's in, you realize that he's stressed, you try to connect with him. Now dealing with an employee on an individual level, you try to mitigate his situation by spreading out the work, even at the cost of customer experience, right? Because at this point, you're trying to maintain a customer experience, but you're killing your workforce. So you have to find a balance. You draw back in some area or areas, enabling you to reduce the workload for Andrew, and then you give him a short vacation. Best case scenario, when he comes back, he is, filled with a kind of a new respect for the organization and energy that's positive. That energy influences the people around him. So there is an overall positive effect networked out from Andrew when he comes back, because he's been helped out of a situation he didn't expect to get help from. And at the end of the day, right, you want to do lag measures to figure out, did it help to act the way I did? So you're going to, do surveys on your mitigation strategies. You're going to keep watching the stress surveys. You want to do exit interviews to figure out, how people were affected by your mitigation strategies, and maybe use incident reports to get a read on stress-related behaviors going forward. So any questions on Andrew's situation or ideas, things you disagree with? Could this be better?
So my thought is, if the company has the means to redistribute Andrew's workload, then they were being a bad boss by making him do 3 people's jobs. And so I think there's some corporate problems here that are the real problem.
Yeah, that's a worthwhile insight.
So one of my things that I would even suggest is, I'm big on transparency and openness, and from a leader or employer perspective, that only, obviously, depending on what the information is that you're sharing, is being open and the biggest thing is just keeping people in the loop and them understanding where it is in the process, because them wanting to know what is happening, what steps are being taken. So I would even say where a lot of people are seeing everything as, oh, you know, I would even say over the past 5 to 7 years, this is not uncommon for employees to be taking on extra workloads. They're always told it's going to be temporary, but then it ends up sticking. But even having some kind of like timeline of, look, this is what we're doing. These are the steps we're taking to make this temporary. But what are your thoughts on, like, as an employer, how much to share and how much to kind of, without like oversharing to a negative?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. My idealist says share everything. But my idealist self is not practical. And one of the difficult realizations I've had about how people operate is that when you extend an olive branch, they'll either take it or they'll slap it away. And because we're irrational and emotional, if you communicate, if you share a lot of information, there is a risk that the information will be misused. So let's say, like in the case of sharing salaries across the board. I mean, I as a principal, I think salaries should be pretty open, but there's a risk that when you have that type of information about your neighbors, you use it to justify bitterness or resentment. So to respond more directly to your thoughts, communication is really great. Openness is really, really great. But it needs to be part of a healthy relationship and a healthy paradigm. So when you communicate openly, it's to people who have been fostered and prepared to some extent to be open-minded and reflective of the information they receive. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Good. Any other thoughts on Andrew's situation, guys? I could jump to another one. I think, yeah, we have another, 10 minutes? Let's jump to the second parable. This is Benita. Benita is going to act like an adversary in the organization. She's going to act like an enemy. She has kids at home. They are not in childcare because childcare has been shut down. And she has an elderly parent at home that she is scared for. So although she's been social distancing for months now, she also has the care of her kids and her parent to worry about. And she's very stressed. So when her team lead calls her out on some more or less exhaustion related mistakes, her response is foul, right? She has an outburst, yelling, using foul language, denying mistakes exist. And from her perspective, having committed herself to the organization for years, it is totally unfair to call her out on mistakes right now, given everything. So her new disposition that she's picked up is, this organization doesn't care about me, so I am just going to do the very minimum. I'm going to be the minimum amount of committed as I can be just to get a paycheck, because I can't quit right now. But like you've lost my loyalty as a company, essentially. So as a manager, as a team lead, as a boss, CEO, what could we have incited? What could we have realized ahead of time, given the environment we're in and the circumstances we're in, that would have, you know, been pertinent to what Benita is right now experiencing?
Is it like messed up for me to ask, is there like a historical precedence of her using foul language and having multiple outbursts?
That's absolutely pertinent. No, she's been
Out of character. This
she's been a model employee for years.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be going the route, if I were her either manager or employer, I would go the route of sitting down and just, like, she's human, ask her what is wrong, what help do you need, what is it that we can do to help you along in this, you know, whether it be a little bit more flexible hours, or, you know, is there just one project that you need help with, or anything like that, is what I would personally do.
I would say the exact same thing as Lynn. Yes, if she's been a model employee, something else is going on. I would try and find the root of the problem. Yeah, I would just dive deeper into it.
Yeah, but yeah, absolutely positive responses on an interpersonal level. Right.
She's denying that she's made a mistake, right?
Yes, she did.
So that could come up with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with any conversation, whether it always needs to start, it all goes back to the question you posed to us earlier, is bad experience or bad behavior. And if you start a conversation with saying, look, you made this mistake, you're immediately putting someone on the defensive. And from my past experience with employees or contractors or anyone that you work with, as soon as you come to them and just allow them to vent and give them that opportunity to say their piece without you interrupting, without you judging, that really kind of makes the scenario, it doesn't go away, but it lightens it to take it out of that animosity. So I would say, you know, just even though she has made some mistakes, not starting with that, because the last thing you want to do is immediately put someone on the defensive.
Absolutely. Those really, really great insights. You know, one of the things that using a lead behavior can do for us is that it helps prevent the conflict cycle from happening. It can help break the conflict cycle, but it's even more useful in preventing the cycle. Could we take some of those interpersonal strategies and instill them in our team leads in advance of this conflict? Could we educate team leads on how to interact with someone who is high stress? And that becomes mitigation for the conflict before it even occurs.
Like actual training to the team leads to handle situations like this better?
Yeah. So you have, let's say you're the upper manager. You're coming into the situation because this conflict has occurred. Mm-hmm. You are equipped to listen and be able to reflect on what Benita is going through and what she's saying. You're able to let her vent. You're good at not objectifying people, and you're able to diffuse the conflict. That would potentially be good mitigation here. Can we take that skill set and give it to the lower level manager as a preemptive lead behavior?
It's like when people ask to speak to a manager when the host is saying the same thing. About like restaurants is what I go to when it comes to
Mhm.
a situation like that. You know, a customer wants to sit down, the host says it's 2 hour wait. I want to speak to a manager because I don't believe you, the lower employee, telling me is true. And essentially, the manager just walks over and literally says the same thing, just with a title above their name. Um, and in that situation, what we did was basically we had one of the hosts pretty much be the sole face. So there wasn't a bunch of, I guess, minions of us walking around. So it looked like, you know, you were a maitre d'. There was a significant authority name to it. And that kind of changed it up. We didn't have as many people needing to speak to a manager to hear that there was a 2 hour wait. Kind of just, that was like the appearance, right?
Yeah.
Um, essentially like a facade that you're putting on to mitigate that. So if you're doing that to this situation, like it has to be real. It can't be a facade. Like it can't just be, oh, they're just being nice to me in this situation, and that's why like my team leads, you know, doing this right. It would have, like you said, it'd have to be across the whole board that all the team leads would have to get this certain skill set to
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
mitigate a situation like this, and it had to be fair. Because it's very easy to fall into team leads being the favorite or them favoriting other lower employees. And I don't know if that probably complicates the situation that we're reading, but that's like where I see.
Human beings complicate the situation. Um, but you know, that's just one idea, though, right? I mean, training your lower managers as a way of preventing conflict might be effective, although probably more costly, right, to institute.
Mhm.
You could also, as a preemptive measure, just make sure you have a clear chain of events for people to follow when there's a conflict, right? When the lower manager engages with Benita and Benita has an outburst, that lower level manager either knows because they've practiced or has a resource to go to that tells them, okay, here's steps 1, 2, and 3, and you're going to be fine because we're going to take care of you. You know, we're going to take care of the situation.
Yeah.
They can be preemptive. Let's say we wanted to help a group of employees that are all in a similar situation to Benita. And it's something that we could see in advance. Childcare is closed, right? In a lot of places, there's no childcare to be had. And if you have a large contingent of employees that have kids, that is a stress generator you can help with in advance of experiencing the cost of that stress. You might do something like provide a private childcare stipend. If people had a little more resource to spend on bringing in, you know, their niece to watch the kids, or, you know, close friend or a nanny, or hire out from an organization that's not closed for in-home care. This would also could help with employees who have elderly parents at home. They just need help. And if you could do that in a low-cost way, just to reduce the resource cost, that would be a lead behavior that reduced the overall stress for this group of employees.
Yeah, I think something also along the lines of even really looking at flexible work hours is huge for that, because if you have a certain amount of time where, I mean, because not all work needs to be done within that 9 to 5 period. I mean, yes, you need to be available to talk to people if they have questions, and they should respond, but if people are working on their own individual work and there's a deadline on it done, I mean, this is how I used to work with my employees. It was, look, as long as it's done on time, I can reach you when I need you. I don't care if you work on it at 2:00 in the afternoon or 2:00 in the morning. As long as it's done, you're getting it you know, but really being able to keep that in mind. And fortunately, I think that is definitely going to be the case for a lot more employers moving forward with all of this stuff happening. The other thing that I would, and maybe this is like going beyond the work environment, but if you're an employee, maybe not at a large company, but say you have a company that maybe has anywhere from, you know, up to 25 or 30 people, knowing that this pandemic is completely and utterly affecting every single person, whether, you know, in their work life or their personal life, or just, you know, obviously them in general, is having, like, you could do one of a couple things. You could do something where you group people together to where that's like a little micro team to not necessarily help with the work per se, but to be there as a support system. And then even as the employer, maybe have a once a week or once every other week meeting where the sole purpose is, okay, what are the issues that you're seeing on the ground? What are some options for alleviating those problems, to where it's solely focused on the fact that everybody is having to change the mental output or the mental idea of how we work right now.
Hey, Jonathan, I just want to say, first of all, great presentation. And second of all, there's always been problems with employees in the workplace, but with the pandemic, instead of maybe one or two problems, you have multiple problems. So it's not just increased workload, but it's the, childcare. It's the, how do I operate now when I can't do things the way I used to do? So now, instead of just one problem that requires good communication, under good circumstances, you need good communication with employees. Otherwise, it doesn't work out very well. But now you've got multiple problems, and I think communication probably is more important now than ever before.